Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of What's Hot with Sea of Tranquility. That's right, it's Wednesday, new album review day today, and I've got in the co-captain's chair for this particular episode, Mr. Luis Nasser. What's happening, my friend?
Not much. I'm sitting here at home. I'm building my pedal board because we're going to start playing again. So
Nice.
We have to get ourselves sorted out.
Putting together pedal boards is always interesting. It's like, what's best going into what's the correct order?
Especially when you spent 2 years in a pandemic without really doing much, and you've put out an album, and now you have to remember how you recorded everything and what goes where.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but I've been doing that today. So
you actually record and go out and play live, so it's a little more difficult for you. For me, figuring out what to put on my pedal board in what order, nobody really cares because nobody listens to it but me. But we let the professionals really get into
that. Could change. Somebody might invite you to do some recording one day. You never know.
Yeah. Hopefully not, but but yeah, you never know. You never know, but it's not something I look for. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. So we've got a brand new reissue remix of a very cool album that, if there are folks out there that have not heard this record from 1997, you're really missing out. And quite frankly, it's almost like it's a good thing that you have missed out, because now we actually get to hear this really great prog rock album from the 90s the way it always should have sounded. And I'm talking about the great band Discipline, Unfolded Like Staircase. We both got it. Remixed by none other than Terry Brown, the Terry Brown, who's worked with Rush and Max Webster, and like a who's who. Fates Warning, Tiles, Cutting Crew, Voivod, IQ, Klaatu. Just a million bands that everybody knows, and just the guy knows his way around the studio. So Louis, I don't know if you want to give a little bit of history of this album. So it came out in 1997. This was their second album.
Well, this is around the time when I met the guys. I'm wearing my Orion T-shirt because that was the original version.
This is the original right here,
and that's the one that has the weird booklet. Like one of the pages is stapled in the wrong way. Yeah. So suddenly one of them is going to be upside down, or it was in mine. But the thing with this band is, initially it was Matthew Parmenter, Matt Kennedy. It was John, Paul Zenzel on drums, and the guitar player was John Preston Buddha. And they used to drive all the way from Detroit to play in Baltimore at Orion. Mike Potter, who was the owner and the guy who ran Orion, was a big fan. And they had a blank check to come in whenever. So they would come in once or twice a year to play shows. And that's where I met them. And then they would start playing in other places around in Maryland. There was a record store called Phantasmagoria where I went to see them. And in those days, and this is still true, if you read the credits, and I need my old man glasses, but it's still there, right? It says, additional thanks, blah, 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 there's a whole bunch of names. General apologies to anyone whom Parmenter has offended while in his cups. Amen. Right? And in those days, I think my first conversation with Matthew was he had been drinking a lot of Guinness.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. But he is a very nice, very thoughtful, very gentle guy when you meet him. But when he's been drinking, though, he can be quite. I was never offended by him. I thought it was funny, but apparently some people must have had an issue. I was always intrigued by him. I thought he was just a very, very strange guy, but with a lot of really good music and really good ideas. And he had to assume this personality. He would paint his face like a mime, and then he could get on stage and do it. That's right. And in the old days, he was just the lead singer, and they had somebody else playing keyboards for Push and Profit, and then he just assumed that role. He writes all the music. everything, and then they all just get together and rehearse it and put it together. And this is truly one of those records that it became part of the soundtrack of my life. I think that is a fair thing to say. I listened to it nonstop for years, right? Years. It was always in my car. I was always listening to it. And then when I met some of the other guys with whom I later was with, Mike Cood, they also heard it and they also became obsessed with it. And me and Andy Tillotson in particular were really into this record. It was this, we were obsessed with it. And so it is difficult for me to be entirely objective because I have an emotional attachment to it. And also through the years, I've become friends with these guys. We've done 2 tours with them, right? So, but nonetheless, I just want to, what I want to talk about is not that, but rather just the quality of the work, which I think is exceptional. And one of the minuses that it had in the original, in my opinion, was the drums. The sounds were a little muffled. It was not a great sounding record. In spite of that, I've always insisted it's one of the best records in my collection and one of the best records that I have by anyone. I love it that much and I'll defend it. It's great, right?
I mean, it came out at an interesting time because we're looking at 97. So by 97, this kind of new wave of prog is really starting to explode. So we're already hot in the heels of Spock's Beard and the Flower Kings and Angleguard and Glass Hammer, right? All these bands are popping up. And then this comes out, which doesn't sound like any of those records at all.
Correct.
And I agree with you. It's funny because when the guys from progrock.com sent me this new remix, they specifically told me you really have to listen to this and then go back and listen to the original and listen to this again. And like you, when the original album came out, I played this to death back in the day. And yeah, not the greatest sounding album in the world, but I never minded it all that much, right?
Right.
I hadn't listened to it in a long time until like recently, after I had listened to the new one quite a number of times. And then I was like, wow, this really doesn't sound all that good compared to this.
Yes.
But it's still, the material is still great. It's got like, this haunting quality to it. It's not a happy album.
No.
It's got like this dissonant kind of like King Crimson shit going on and a little bit of that Van der Graaf angst, right? The Mellotron sounds like it could have come off of the first couple of King Crimson albums, but the vocals are so awesomely like dark and twisted. The guitar is amazing. Long songs, lots of emotion, a lot of atmosphere. But then you hear the new mix and you're like, it like explodes. I mean, it's just like all of a sudden this thing is like big and massive.
Not only big, there's lots of stuff they recorded that were just packed in the mix, right? Yeah. A lot of violins, a lot of little saxophone arrangements, lots of little layers and layers, harmonies, and other things that were never used, right? Yeah. I remember when Martin Forty invited me to his house to hear this before anybody was supposed to hear it. He let me hear it. He had the vinyl pressing. So I went to his house in the middle of the pandemic, fully masked and everything, for the purpose of just listening to this record. Right? And I stood in his living room. I stood for the duration of the whole thing, just listening to it with my eyes closed. Because and when it was done, I was so moved by it. And I was so pissed off that they didn't do it like that the first time, right? Yeah. Because especially, I mean, there's 4 songs, we can talk about them, but the last song, Before the Storm, which is one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. It's so transformed in this version. There's so many new layers. And it all begins like any good mix, the drums, which were a very problematic part of the sound. They almost sound like they were re-recorded. And they weren't. They were just remixed, and they really snap and they pop and they have that, The bass, which was always a strong point, and Matt Kennedy is a very good bass player, and he plays all the stuff that's laid out for him in a very beefy way, right? He just like really digs into the strings when he needs to, and he's just great. That is now blended even better with the drums. right? Because the kick drum is now occupying the right part of the frequencies. So it has that extra punch, right? Which somebody that knows what they're doing, like Terry Brown, of course, that's his bread and butter, right? And then all the candy, right?
Everything else, yeah.
All the keyboards, all the pianos, all the violins, all the saxophones, all the singing, and of course, John Preston Buddha's guitar, which as far as I can tell, consisted of just a Les Paul, a volume pedal, and his mids, his amp, right? And that was it. There's no pedals, there's nothing. It's just like a dirty channel, a clean channel, and he's just playing. Right? And he was a guy who, it was the first person I ever saw who liked to play wearing socks only. Right? It seemed odd, like he had to take his shoes off. Like, dude, have you seen that stage? I wouldn't do that if I were you, but that's how he rolled. Yeah. And it was an incredible experience to see those guys live at that time when they were basically touring for the album, right? Because they were completely unknown, as was the case for most prog bands. You show up, you drive for 8 or 10 hours, and you get to a place and you play in front of. I mean, if you go to Orion, you're going to play in front of 100 very attentive people, and that's a very good night. The alternative is you might drive all night and get to that venue and play in front of 5.
5, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This has happened, right? It happened to them. It has happened to me. Happens to all of us, right? So it's a difficult thing, but they kept at it, and they were playing the prog days and all the festivals they could, and they were really developing into a very cohesive live unit. But when they played these songs, they were very different from the older ones that we knew, like Circuitry and the stuff from Push and Profit. The older stuff was very different. This has a theme to it in a way. I wouldn't say it's a concept record because it's not, but all the songs deal with, the first one, Canto 4. A person who finds themselves in limbo.
Here I am in limbo. I mean,
because they were not baptized, right? And now suddenly he's realizing, well, I there was no fault of mine, right? Why am I here? All the album has these interrogations about it. Crutches is, alcohol and the loneliness and the desperation of somebody who's just falling behind in his bills and falling behind in his life and can't catch up. And the more he tries, the deeper he slides, right? And then, of course, the Into the Dream, right? Which is a massive song in compositionally and also in length, but it interrogates, what is the meaning of violence when you dream, and what is, can that somehow percolate into your life in some way, right? But Matthew has always been very interested in these subjects, right? Which initially, when you don't know him, makes you think that he's a little crazy, right? But actually, like I said, he's a very, very intelligent and a very nice guy, and he's very mild-mannered, when you know him. But he's just naturally curious. But when he puts on the fucking mime suit, he's a maniac, right? And he is living these songs. That's what you hear in the recording. He is these characters. He is in that desperation. He is living it for you, right? And it's really a very powerful thing. And to be able to hear it with this clarity and with that separation, it really is a gift for me. When I first heard that they were going to do this, I honestly thought, okay, I guess everybody's remixing their old stuff. And this is a classic, so absolutely, why the hell not, right? Make a vinyl, everybody wants vinyl now, fine, but I was a little skeptical. Honestly, I didn't understand it. I thought, why don't you guys just make a new record? This is what I was thinking, right? And we did talk about it a little bit, but it would happen during the pandemic, so there wasn't that much contact. But now that we have it, I think this is absolutely,
yeah.
And the closer, let's not forget Before the Storm, which I think is one of the saddest songs about heartache ever written. And it is, but it's very powerful because the imagery, it's kind of like when you read, I mean, you're into horror and all that. To me, what I love about Matthew's style, he writes about these ideas in the same way that somebody like Lovecraft writes about horror. Like Lovecraft never really tells you what these things are. He just tells you how scared shitless the characters are facing these things. So it's up to your imagination, right? Nothing is spelled out in all detail. It's just for you to allow the music and the singing to draw you into that world, that little environment, whatever that is. And they're all little movies. To me, that's how I think of this record. They're 4 little short movies.
Yep.
And they're just interconnected because they deal with loneliness, they deal with a sense of self-interrogation, they deal with personal issues. But they're not autobiographical. There are things that anybody can relate to. So it's a very, very well put together thing. It's not just the music, which is amazing. I think that somehow they just caught lightning in a bottle, right?
They did. I mean, there's a sense of melancholy that goes through the whole album. And you're absolutely right. You listen to the album, it's not a concept album, but there are musical themes that kind of cross through all the 4 tracks that really, if you just close your, like, let's say you heard this for the first time, right? You never listened to this album before. You don't look at the track listing. You don't know anything. You just put it on. The whole album flows so well that it's almost like 1 hour long composition broken down into many parts, right?
Exactly.
And
it's a genius record.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they set up to write it like that, but he had that thing in him, and it was the right time in the right place, and God bless him, he did it, because it's fucking awesome.
It is, yeah. And I think for those who missed this the first time around, now's the time to check it out. And he's just such a, the whole band is great, yes, but he is like an extraordinary force up front there. That if you love, like, I hate to keep going back to the classic stuff, but if you love like a guy like Hamill or Gabriel, who were able to tell these twisted tales in front of and on top of this extraordinary emotional music, this doesn't sound like those bands, but the impact is similar.
And when you're talking about history, I just want to point out, this is just something I know. Matthew wrote these songs without having ever listened to Van der Graaf,
which is really interesting, right? Yeah.
And then later he met Peter Hamill and they became friends and he became a fan. But everybody always said, well, this is very Van der Graaf, but in reality, this is very, very Matthew Parmenter.
Yeah.
Right? They're just these 2 weird minds that are kind of cut of the same cloth, and they have some commonalities. Yeah. But it's really not as derivative as one might think, because he really was operating in that more in a way, kind of like what I did. I came up listening to rock and other things. I wasn't like into prog, and that was the thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful record, and I'm really glad.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, and I think it's not derivative at all, because I think that Discipline, and specifically this album, does not sound like Van der Graaf. Yes. The only kind of similarities I always kind of caught on with is that he has a similar edge and sense of angst to his delivery that will remind you of Peter Hamill. He doesn't really sound like Peter Hamill.
No.
And I mentioned King Crimson because I think a lot of the Mellotron tones will take you back to Core of the Crimson King, Wake Up Beside, and a couple of those albums. It's that emotional and big and ominous sounding, but the guitars are totally original. The song structures are totally original. So you'll hear little things that might remind you of something else, but this is one of the most unique sounding albums, I think, from that whole era of the late 90s, where all of a sudden prog was seemingly coming back from the dead, right? And
that's right.
Yeah.
And I like a lot of those records also, like if you compare it to Anglagard, right, which is I love, right?
Oh, yeah.
Anglagard is extraordinarily layered, right? There's lots of stuff happening. This is surprisingly sparse. Like there's a lot of room in all this music, right? And but everything is very, very deliberate. That's the thing I love with Parmenter's compositions. They're not cramped. It's not like going to the Museum of the Vatican. Priceless things everywhere. It's a fucking warehouse, right? This is really everything is in its right place, kind of like the Louvre. They find how to display it so you can appreciate it as you walk by, right? And this is something that's also not often said about this record. I think that it is very expertly paced, and it has just the right. Had they shifted some of the songs around in order, it wouldn't work as well.
No,
I've tried it. I've tried playing this record in every order possible, right? I've done every permutation because
I don't think shuffle works on this at all.
No, you have to. And for me, it's a record that I really, if I put it on, I'm going to be sitting and listening to it, start to finish.
Yeah.
I don't don't let it and then do something. Like, I'm listening to this, I'm throwing on the headphones and I'm taking a plunge. This is even after all these years, right? I have to do it. And I was lucky also that there was recently a show at the 140 Manor where they came and they played the whole record with some of the newer stuff. And that was just incredible. And also, I want to give lots of credit to Chris Heron. I mean, John Preston-Buddha is no longer with the band, hasn't been for a long time. But Chris Heron of Tiles has been playing with them for a number of years now. If you guys don't know who Tiles is, I also recommend you check them out. But Chris Heron is one of the nicest, most down-to-earth guys you've ever, and he's got a very dry sense of humor too, which is very, he just fit right in with the guys, and kind of like, Billy Preston with the Beatles, he did elevate them. He gave them a little boost. Yep. So they're all now playing a little better. They're a little tighter. They're a little, it's a beautiful thing to see. Right? Not that they were ever sloppy. I don't mean that, but what I'm trying to say is they're just that much better with him in the band. So now is the time, if anybody is in the vicinity. I know they're planning some shows in New York. We're probably going to be playing with them soon as well. But if you have a chance, don't miss it, because they're playing this stuff, all of it, and it's amazing, right? So,
yeah. So I'll say, for all of you watching, if you've never listened to this album, go out and get the new remix. Terry Brown has done a masterful job. If, like me and like Lewis and countless other people, have the original, and all these years are pretty happy with it, still go out and get this, because you haven't heard this album this way, the way it was probably originally intended to be.
Yes,
this is fine, and this is still great, but you listen to them back to back, night and day.
It is different. There's new tracks that were added that were recorded originally and were not mixed in.
Yep. There's
new information, right? It's not just the remix of what you already heard.
Yeah.
So that's also important. It has some little extra that makes it, that elevates it. It truly does. It doesn't, And if you buy the LP, for all the LP, I think they throw in the CD for free, the old one, right? So you can get the old one, and you can throw the LP in your player, and you can hear all the splendor, right?
That's right.
So, because it is important to A/B them, if you to appreciate it, if you are familiar with it.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah, that's the thing. I like I said, I hadn't heard Unfolded in quite a few years, and I went and listened to the new one, and I was pretty amazed at what I was hearing. And then I'm like, well, maybe it's just because I haven't heard the album in so long. And then I went and played the original, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a bit different. That's much better listening experience, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
and
the packaging is great too. So,
yeah, it has lots of new photos. Some of these photos I remember from the old days, right? I remember seeing some of these posters and things. So that was also kind of a treat for me,
Yeah.
This is I think that you need this in your collection if you're at all interested in prog rock. This is a no-brainer. You have to have it.
Yeah. So definitely go check it out. It's released on Strung Out Records, so www.strungoutrecords.com. Go get it. Unfolded Like Staircase, the classic from Discipline, their second album from 1997, remixed by Terry Brown. Got some weird lighting things going on here. In 2021, during the pandemic, it's never sounded better. So check it out. And visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, of course, we are on YouTube all the damn time. I want to thank Lewis for hopping on and doing this kind of co-captain chair panel thing here on this.
I loved it.
Release.
Get this.
Yes. Get it. Check it out. Discipline, Unfolded Like Staircase, remixed. It's glorious. And thanks for watching. We'll see you all here real soon on the channel. For Luis Nasser, I am Pete Pardo. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Cheers.